My sister Sarah was getting a checkup at the hospital when they found out she had leukemia. Turns out that routine visit she'd been putting off for months probably saved her life, or so we all thought at the time. I remember getting the call from Mom like it was yesterday, even though it's been 3 years now. 3 years since everything I thought I knew about my family turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. I was at work when Mom called, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Sarah had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and they needed to start treatment immediately. I left everything on my desk and drove straight to the hospital, my hands trembling on the steering wheel the entire way. Sarah was only 26, just a year younger than me. This kind of thing wasn't supposed to happen to people like us. When I got to her room, the whole family was already there. Mom and Dad were sitting on either side of Sarah's bed, holding her hands. My older brother Marcus was standing by the window, his jaw clenched in that way he does when he's trying not to cry. And then there was James, Sarah's fiance of 2 years, looking absolutely devastated in the corner. They were supposed to get married in 4 months. They'd already sent out the invitations. Sarah looked so small in that hospital bed, her face pale but her eyes still bright with that stubborn spark she'd always had. When she saw me, she tried to smile. "Hey, big brother," she said, using the nickname she'd given me even though I was only 13 months older. "Guess I'm going to have to postpone the wedding, huh?" I couldn't speak. I just went to her and hugged her as carefully as I could, like she might break. She hugged me back hard though, and whispered in my ear, "I'm going to beat this thing, Tommy, I promise." And we all believed her. Sarah had always been the strongest person I knew. When she was 8, she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars and didn't cry once. When she was 16, she stood up to a group of bullies who were harassing a kid at school, even though they were all bigger than her. When she was 23, she started her own graphic design business from nothing and made it profitable within a year. If anyone could beat cancer, it was Sarah. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments, treatment plans, and medical jargon I didn't understand. Sarah needed chemotherapy, and there was talk of a bone marrow transplant if the chemo didn't work well enough. We all got tested to see if we were matches. I prayed every night that I could be the one to save my sister. But I wasn't a match, neither was Marcus. We were devastated, but the doctors said they'd keep looking through the registry, and that there was still a good chance the chemotherapy would be enough. Sarah started her first round of treatment 2 weeks after the diagnosis. I went with her to every single appointment I could. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job at the accounting firm, and my boss, thankfully, was understanding. Mom and Dad were there constantly too, and Marcus came whenever he could get away from his law practice. James was there more than anyone, though. He barely left Sarah's side those first few weeks. He'd taken time off from his work as a physical therapist to be with her, and I remember thinking how lucky Sarah was to have found someone who loved her that much. The chemo was brutal. Sarah lost her beautiful long brown hair within the first month. She was so sick, throwing up constantly, barely able to eat. There were days when she was so weak she could barely lift her head, but she never complained, not once. She'd joke about getting to try out different wig styles, or about how she was finally getting the extreme weight loss she'd never wanted. It was during the second month of treatment that things started to get strange. I noticed Mom having quiet, intense conversations with Dad that would stop the moment anyone else came into the room. Marcus seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and stepping out to take calls. And James, who had been so attentive at first, started showing up late to the hospital, or sometimes not at all. When I asked Sarah about it, she just shrugged. "James has to work," she said. "He can't put his whole life on hold for me," but I could see the hurt in her eyes when she said it. Then one night, about 3 months into Sarah's treatment, I stopped by Mom and Dad's house to drop off some groceries. I had a key, so I let myself in, calling out to let them know I was there. No one answered, but I could hear voices coming from Dad's study. The door was slightly ajar, and I was about to push it open when I heard my name. "Tommy can't know about this," Mom was saying, her voice tight with stress. "Neither can Sarah, especially not Sarah." I froze, my hand on the door. "I know," Dad replied, "but we're running out of time. The lawyers are pushing for an answer." "Tell them we need more time," Mom said. "We can't do anything until after." She broke off, and there was a long silence. "Until after what?" Marcus's voice. He was in there too. "Until after Sarah dies. Is that what you were going to say?" "Don't say that," Mom's voice rose. "Your sister is going to be fine. The treatment is working." "Is it though?" Marcus said, and his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Because from what the doctors are saying, her chances aren't great without a bone marrow transplant, and we both know there's a perfect match out there that she can't have." My blood ran cold. What did that mean? There was a match for Sarah and she couldn't have it. "We made our decision," Dad said firmly. It's too risky. Too many questions would be raised. You mean it might interfere with the inheritance, Marcus said bitterly. God forbid we let the truth come out if it means losing money. That's not fair, Mom said, but her voice was weak. You don't understand the complications. I understand perfectly, Marcus said. You're willing to let Sarah die to protect a secret that's not even yours to keep. She's not going to die, Mom was crying now. They'll find another match, they will. I couldn't listen anymore. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, left the groceries on the kitchen counter, and got out of that house. My mind was reeling. What secret were they talking about? What match couldn't Sarah have? And what did any of this have to do with an inheritance? I drove around for hours, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Finally, around midnight, I ended up at Sarah's apartment. James's car was in the parking lot, which was good. I needed to talk to someone, and James was practically family. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. That was weird, because I could see lights on inside. I tried the door and found it unlocked. Sarah, James, I called out as I stepped inside. What I heard next made my blood freeze for the second time that night. We just have to wait a little longer. It was James's voice, coming from the bedroom. The doctors said if this round of chemo doesn't work, she's probably not going to make it. And you're sure you're in the will? A woman's voice, not Sarah's, higher-pitched, younger sounding. Positive, James said. She redid it when we got engaged. Everything goes to me if she dies before the wedding. Her business, her savings, the trust fund she gets access to when she turns 30, all of it. That's next year, right, when she turns 30. Yeah, $250,000. Plus her business is worth at least another $100,000, and she's got about $50,000 in savings, not to mention the life insurance policy through her work. The woman laughed. It was a cruel sound. So you're going to be almost $500,000 richer, and then we can finally be together for real. Just have to play the devoted fiance a little while longer, James said. It's not easy, you know, sitting in that hospital, pretending to care, watching her throw up and lose her hair. Poor baby, the woman cooed mockingly. It'll all be worth it soon, and if the chemo does work. There was a pause. Let's just say I've been doing some research on how to make sure someone with a compromised immune system gets a serious infection. Nothing that could be traced back to me, of course. I didn't hear what the woman said next because the ringing in my ears was too loud. James was planning to let Sarah die, or worse, to help her along, for money. I must have made some kind of sound because suddenly, the bedroom door flew open and James was standing there in just his boxers, his face going white when he saw me. Behind him, I could see a blonde woman scrambling to cover herself with a sheet. Tommy, James said, his voice strangled. I can explain. Explain what? I heard myself say, though I felt disconnected from my own voice. Explain how you're cheating on my dying sister, or explain how you're planning to murder her for her money. It's not, I wasn't, you don't understand, James stammered. Something in me snapped. I'm not a violent person. I'd never hit anyone in my entire life, but I crossed that room in 3 steps and my fist connected with James's jaw with a satisfying crunch. He went down hard, blood spurting from his mouth. Tommy, stop, the blonde woman shrieked. I ignored her. I grabbed James by the front of his boxers and hauled him up, slamming him against the wall. You listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You're going to get whatever trash you have in this apartment and you're going to leave. If you ever come near my sister again, if you ever even think about her again, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster you are, and that's if I don't kill you myself first. You can't, Sarah will, James sputtered through his bleeding mouth. Sarah will what? Be heartbroken that her fiancé left her while she's sick. I slammed him against the wall again. Yeah, she will be, but better heartbroken than dead. Now get the hell out. I threw him toward the bedroom and he stumbled, catching himself on the doorframe. The blonde was already grabbing her clothes. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of them both, just for insurance. I have evidence of everything, I said, holding up my phone. I recorded your whole conversation before I came in. If you make any trouble, it goes to the police. Now you have 10 minutes to get out before I call them anyway. It was a bluff. I hadn't recorded anything, but James didn't know that. He and the blonde got dressed faster than I've ever seen anyone move and were out the door in less than 5 minutes, James still dripping blood on the carpet. When they were gone, I sank down onto Sarah's couch and put my head in my hands. My knuckles were throbbing, probably bruised or broken, but that pain was nothing compared to what I was feeling inside. How was I going to tell Sarah? She loved James. This would destroy her. But I had to tell her. I couldn't let her wonder why he'd left. And more importantly, I needed to make sure she changed her will immediately, before James could do anything. I spent that night at Sarah's apartment, cleaning up the blood and trying to figure out what to say. In the morning, I went to the hospital where Sarah was staying for this round of chemo. She was awake, looking tired, but managing a smile when I came in. "Hey, big brother, what happened to your hand?" I looked down at my swollen, bruised knuckles. I punched James. Her smile faded. "What? Why?" I pulled up a chair next to her bed. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt, but I need you to listen to everything before you react, okay?" The smile was completely gone now, replaced by worry. "Okay." I told her everything, about going to her apartment, about what I'd heard about James and the blonde woman. I watched my sister's face crumble as I spoke, watched the tears start to flow. When I finished, she was sobbing silently, her whole body shaking. I held her while she cried, furious at James all over again for causing her this pain, for adding this stress when she was already fighting for her life. Finally, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "He was going to let me die," she whispered, "maybe even help me die." "I won't let that happen," I said fiercely. "Sarah, we need to change your will, today, and we need to tell the hospital staff not to let James in anymore." She nodded numbly. "Okay." I called Marcus, who came right away with the necessary paperwork. Whatever strange conversation I'd overheard at Mom and Dad's house, Marcus was at least on Sarah's side when it came to James. He was coldly furious when I told him what had happened, and he had Sarah's will changed within hours. She split her estate between me and Marcus instead, and took out a restraining order against James for good measure. James tried to call and text hundreds of times over the next few days, claiming I'd misunderstood, that he could explain, that he loved Sarah. We blocked him on everything. He even tried to come to the hospital, but security turned him away. Finally, his lawyer sent a letter threatening to sue for defamation. Marcus, being a lawyer himself, sent back a letter detailing exactly what James had said and inviting him to please pursue legal action so that we could discuss his plans to commit murder in open court. We never heard from James again. But the damage was done. Sarah's heartbreak was almost as bad as the cancer. She withdrew into herself, barely speaking, just going through the motions of treatment. The doctors were worried. They said her will to fight seemed to be fading, and that was almost as dangerous as the disease itself. Mom and Dad came every day, trying to cheer her up, but nothing seemed to help, and I still couldn't shake what I'd overheard at their house. There was something they weren't telling us, something about a bone marrow match that Sarah couldn't have. I decided I needed answers. One evening, when I knew Mom and Dad would be home, I went over there. Marcus was there too, and I wondered if they'd planned it that way. "We need to talk," I said without preamble, "all of us, about the secret you're keeping from Sarah." Mom's face went white. Dad looked down. Marcus just looked at me steadily. "What are you talking about?" Mom tried, but her voice was weak. "I heard you," I said. "A few weeks ago, I came by to drop off groceries and I heard you talking in Dad's study about a bone marrow match that Sarah can't have, about a secret that might affect an inheritance. I want to know what you were talking about, now." There was a long silence. Finally, Dad spoke. "Sit down, Tommy." I sat, my heart pounding. "What we're about to tell you can't go any further than this room," Dad said. "It's not our secret to tell, and revealing it could have serious legal and financial consequences. But you're right that it affects Sarah, so we're going to trust you to keep this to yourself." "That depends on what it is," I said. Dad nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He took a deep breath. "Your mother and I aren't Sarah's biological parents." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "Sarah is adopted," Mom said quietly. "We adopted her when she was 3 days old. You were 13 months old at the time. Marcus was 3. I stared at them, trying to process this. "Why didn't you ever tell her? Tell us." "It was a closed adoption," Dad said. "The birth mother made it very clear that she never wanted to be contacted, never wanted the child to know about her, and she had good reasons. She was very young, from a very wealthy and prominent family. Having an illegitimate child would have been a scandal." "Wait," I said. "You know who the birth mother is?" "We've always known," Mom said. "We had to for medical history purposes. The birth mother's family's lawyer set up the adoption. They paid all the medical expenses, gave us a very generous settlement to ensure our discretion." "You were paid to keep quiet about who Sarah's real mother is," I said slowly. "It's not like that," Dad said defensively. "We loved Sarah from the moment we saw her. We would have adopted her regardless. The money was just to ensure that we'd never make trouble for the birth mother's family. And this birth mother, I said, my mind racing. She's a bone marrow match for Sarah, isn't she? The silence was my answer. Oh my God, I breathed. You're going to let Sarah die to protect some rich family's secret. No, Mom said desperately. We've been trying to find a way. The birth mother's lawyer is the one who set up the trust fund for Sarah. That was part of the agreement, that Sarah would be taken care of financially. We've been in contact with him, trying to explain the situation, trying to get permission to at least test the birth mother without revealing why. And I demanded. He's refused, Dad said heavily. He says the birth mother's situation is too delicate. She's married now to someone who doesn't know about Sarah. She has other children. Revealing the truth could destroy her life. So instead Sarah dies, I said flatly. We don't know that the birth mother would even be a match, Marcus said quietly. Just because she's the biological mother doesn't guarantee it. But there's a chance, I said, a good chance, better than a random person from the registry. What do you want us to do, Tommy? Dad asked tiredly. We signed a legally binding contract. If we violate it, we could lose everything. The birth mother's family could sue us for the money they've given us over the years, and it's been a lot. We'd be ruined. And for what? The birth mother has made it clear she wants nothing to do with Sarah. Even if we told her Sarah was dying, she might not agree to be tested. Might not, I said, but she might, and Sarah deserves the chance to ask. It's not that simple, Mom said. Yes, it is, I said, standing up. Either you tell me who Sarah's birth mother is, or I'm going to tell Sarah everything and let her decide what to do. Tommy, please, Mom begged. You don't understand what you'd be risking. I understand that my sister is dying, and there's someone out there who might be able to save her. That's all I need to understand. I headed for the door. Wait, Marcus said. I turned. He looked at Mom and Dad. He's right. We can't just let Sarah die to protect a contract. I've been thinking the same thing for weeks now. Marcus, Dad said warningly. No, Dad, I'm a lawyer, remember. I've actually read that contract. Yes, it says we can't initiate contact with the birth mother, but it doesn't say Sarah can't. She wasn't a party to the agreement. If Sarah contacts her, the birth mother's family will know the information came from us, Dad said. Maybe, Marcus said, or maybe Sarah figures it out another way, maybe through one of those DNA ancestry websites. I stared at my brother. What? He looked at me. Sarah's biological mother is someone we've all met, Tommy. Someone local. Someone whose DNA is likely in one of those family tree databases, along with her relatives. If Sarah did a DNA test, she'd probably figure out the connection pretty quickly. My mind was spinning. Who is it? Just tell me who it is. Marcus looked at Mom and Dad again. They both had their heads down, defeated. Marcus sighed. Elizabeth Harrington, he said quietly. It took me a moment to place the name, and then I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Elizabeth Harrington, as in Harrington Industries, one of the biggest manufacturing companies in our state, as in the Harrington family, who were so rich and powerful they basically owned half the city. Elizabeth Harrington, who I'd seen at charity events, at the country club, in the society pages of the newspaper. Elizabeth Harrington, who was on the board of the hospital where Sarah was being treated. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Now you see why this is complicated, Dad said. Elizabeth Harrington is married to Senator Harrington. She has 3 children with him. She's one of the most prominent women in the state. This secret getting out could destroy not just her, but her entire family. Her husband is likely going to run for governor in the next election. I don't care about her political career, I said harshly. I care about Sarah. So do we, Mom said, tears streaming down her face. But Tommy, even if we tell Sarah, even if she contacts Elizabeth Harrington, what makes you think Elizabeth will agree to help? She gave Sarah up. She made it clear she never wanted to see her again. Why would she risk everything now? Because it's the right thing to do, I said. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Someone who could walk away from their newborn baby, who could pay people off to keep it secret, who could refuse to even be tested when that baby was dying. That didn't sound like someone who would do the right thing. But I had to try for Sarah. I left my parents' house and went straight back to the hospital. Sarah was asleep, so I sat in the chair next to her bed and waited. Around 9 p.m. she woke up. Hey, she said groggily, what are you doing here so late? I found out who your biological mother is, I said without preamble. Sarah's eyes went wide. What? I told her everything, about the adoption, about the contract, about Elizabeth Harrington. I watched her face go through 100 different emotions: shock, hurt, confusion, anger. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "So I was bought. My biological mother's family paid Mom and Dad to take me and never tell anyone." "That's not," I started, but she cut me off. "That's exactly what it is, Tommy. I was an embarrassment, a scandal waiting to happen, so they paid to make me go away." Her voice was bitter. "Sarah, Mom and Dad love you. They've always loved you." "I know," she said quietly. "I do know that, but it doesn't change what she did, what they all did." She paused. "You think she might be a bone marrow match?" "It's possible, more likely than a random stranger, at least." "And you think I should contact her, ask her to be tested?" "I think you deserve the chance to try." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What do I say? Hi, you don't know me, but you gave birth to me 27 years ago and now I'm dying and I need your bone marrow. That'll go over well." "I don't know," I admitted, "but Sarah, what do you have to lose?" She looked at me, her eyes hollow. "My pride, my dignity, the tiny bit of hope I'm still holding on to, that maybe my birth mother had a good reason for giving me up, that maybe she loved me but couldn't keep me. If I contact her and she refuses to help, I lose even that." "Or you gain a chance at life," I said softly. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Sarah said, "I need to think about it." "Okay," I said, "but don't think too long. We don't have unlimited time." Over the next few days, Sarah did think about it. She asked Marcus to get her a copy of the adoption records, which he did. She researched Elizabeth Harrington online, looking at pictures of her perfect family, her perfect life, and she made a decision. "I'm not going to contact her," Sarah told me one afternoon. I'd brought her favorite soup from the deli near her apartment. "I'm not going to beg for her help." "Sarah," I started, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. I'm not going to contact her directly, but I am going to make sure she knows I exist and that I need help. And if she chooses not to respond, then at least I'll know exactly who she is, and so will everyone else." "What are you planning?" I asked warily. Sarah smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "You'll see." A few days later, Sarah asked me to bring her laptop to the hospital. When I asked why, she just said she had some work to do for her business. I thought maybe getting back to work would be good for her, help her feel normal again, so I didn't push. What I didn't know was that Sarah was writing. She was writing her story, all of it. The cancer diagnosis, James's betrayal, the discovery that she was adopted, the identity of her birth mother, the fact that her birth mother was refusing to even be tested as a potential bone marrow donor. She wrote it all in a long, detailed blog post. She also wrote about Elizabeth Harrington, about how the woman was on the board of the hospital where Sarah was being treated, how she walked past Sarah's room sometimes without knowing that her biological daughter was dying just a few feet away, about how Elizabeth was planning a huge charity gala next month to raise money for cancer research, while her own daughter couldn't get her to even consider helping. Sarah sent the blog post to me before she published it. "I'm giving her one chance," she wrote in the email. "If Elizabeth Harrington contacts me in the next 24 hours and agrees to be tested, I won't post this. If she doesn't, it goes live, and I'll make sure it gets seen by every news outlet in the state." The problem was, how would Elizabeth Harrington even know to contact Sarah if she didn't know about the blog post? Sarah had thought of that too. She'd sent a private message to Elizabeth through the hospital board's contact page, explaining who she was and what she needed. The message was polite but clear. Sarah needed her biological mother to be tested as a potential bone marrow donor, and if Elizabeth refused, the whole story would become public. I was terrified of what this would mean. The fallout would be huge. Mom and Dad would probably be sued for breaking the adoption contract. Elizabeth Harrington's family would be furious. There could be legal consequences for all of us. But when I looked at Sarah, pale and thin from the chemo, her eyes bright with a determination I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis, I couldn't bring myself to talk her out of it. She was fighting back, taking control of her own story. How could I deny her that? 24 hours passed. Elizabeth Harrington didn't call, didn't email, didn't send a message through the hospital. Nothing. Sarah published the blog post. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Local news, national news, social media, everywhere. The story had everything: a dying young woman, a heartless wealthy family, betrayal, secrets, a ticking clock. People were outraged. They flooded Elizabeth Harrington's social media with comments demanding she help Sarah. They showed up at Harrington Industries to protest. Someone spray-painted, "Save Sarah" on the wall outside the Harrington family mansion. The Harringtons' first response was a terse statement from their lawyer denying that Elizabeth had any connection to Sarah and threatening legal action for defamation. That just made people angrier. Someone dug up Sarah's adoption records. I don't know how, they were supposed to be sealed, and leaked them online. The dates matched. The hospital matched. The lawyer who'd handled the adoption was the Harringtons' family attorney. The evidence was overwhelming. Within 2 days, Elizabeth Harrington's lawyer released a new statement admitting that yes, Elizabeth had given up a baby for adoption 27 years ago, but that it had been a private matter, and she had no legal obligation to help now. The statement expressed sympathy for Sarah's situation, but maintained that Elizabeth had her own family to think about and couldn't risk the medical procedures involved in donation. That statement might have been the worst thing they could have done. Doctors immediately went on the news explaining that bone marrow donation, while uncomfortable, was not particularly risky, especially for a healthy adult. The Harringtons looked even worse than before. Now they weren't just heartless, they were liars too. The pressure became enormous. Senator Harrington's poll numbers started dropping. Harrington Industries faced boycotts. Elizabeth couldn't appear in public without being swarmed by protesters and reporters. And through it all, Sarah waited in her hospital room, getting weaker every day. The chemo wasn't working as well as the doctors had hoped. Without a bone marrow transplant, she had maybe 6 months to live. It was 3 weeks after Sarah published the blog post when we got the call. Elizabeth Harrington would agree to be tested, but only if Sarah agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the entire situation and take down the blog post. Sarah refused. "She doesn't get to buy my silence again," Sarah said when Marcus presented the offer. "I'm not going to protect her reputation while she does the bare minimum to save my life. She gets tested, and if she's a match, she donates, and the blog post stays up. Take it or leave it." I thought the Harringtons would leave it. They seemed more concerned with damage control than with actually helping Sarah, but I'd underestimated the power of public opinion. The outcry when it was leaked that Elizabeth was demanding an NDA was incredible. Even senators who were friendly with Senator Harrington started distancing themselves. Major clients started pulling contracts from Harrington Industries. Finally, Elizabeth Harrington agreed to be tested with no conditions. I'll never forget the day she came to the hospital. She arrived with a security team and her lawyer, dressed in an expensive suit, her hair and makeup perfect. She looked like she was going to a business meeting, not to potentially save her daughter's life. Sarah refused to see her. "Just do the test," she told the doctor. "I don't need to meet her." But I wanted to see her. I wanted to look this woman in the eye, this woman who had put her reputation above her daughter's life. I waited in the hallway while she was shown to the lab for the blood draw. When she came out, she saw me standing there. We looked at each other for a long moment. Up close, I could see the resemblance. She had Sarah's eyes, Sarah's chin. Looking at her was like looking at an older, colder version of my sister. "You're the brother," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "I am." "You're the one who encouraged her to do this, to make it public." "I'm the one who told her who you were," I said. What she did with that information was her choice. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "You've destroyed my family. My children are being bullied at school. My husband's career is in ruins. All of this could have been handled privately." "Sarah tried to handle it privately," I said coldly. "She gave you 24 hours to respond before she went public. You ignored her." "I didn't see the message until it was too late," Elizabeth snapped. "I get hundreds of messages through the hospital board contact page." "How convenient." We stared at each other with mutual dislike. Finally, Elizabeth said, "If I'm a match, I'll do the donation. But after that, I never want to hear from Sarah again. This ends the moment I'm recovered from the procedure. No relationship, no contact, nothing. Do you understand?" "Perfectly," I said. "And I'm sure Sarah will be devastated to lose the opportunity to have a relationship with such a warm, caring person." Elizabeth's face flushed with anger, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the hospital floor. The test results came back a week later. Elizabeth Harrington was a perfect match for Sarah. The donation was scheduled for 3 weeks out to give Elizabeth time to be medically cleared and prepared. Those 3 weeks were tense. Part of me kept expecting Elizabeth to back out, to find some excuse not to go through with it, but I underestimated the power of public scrutiny. Everyone was watching. If Elizabeth backed out now, she and her family would be completely destroyed, and she knew it. The day of the donation, the hospital was surrounded by news crews. This was the feel-good ending everyone had been waiting for. the heartless rich mother, finally doing the right thing to save her dying daughter. Never mind that she'd had to be publicly shamed into it. Sarah was prepped for the transplant. I stayed with her right up until they wheeled her into the OR. "I'm scared," she whispered to me. "I know," I said, holding her hand, "but you're going to be okay. You're going to beat this. And if I don't, you will." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Tommy, for everything, for fighting for me." "Always," I said. They wheeled her away, and all I could do was wait. Mom and Dad were there, looking haggard and worried. Marcus was on his phone, probably dealing with legal fallout. The Harringtons had indeed sued over the broken adoption contract, though public sentiment was so against them that Marcus thought the case would be dismissed. The transplant took hours. When the doctor finally came out, she was smiling. "It went well," she said. "The bone marrow was successfully transplanted. Now we wait and see if Sarah's body accepts it." The next few weeks were critical. Sarah was kept in isolation to prevent infection while her immune system was essentially non-existent. I could only see her through a glass window, talk to her through a phone. She was so weak, so sick from the conditioning treatment she'd had to undergo before the transplant. But slowly, gradually, she started to improve. The new bone marrow began producing healthy blood cells. Sarah's color started to come back. She began to smile again. 3 months after the transplant, Sarah was declared to be in remission. The cancer was gone. The day she was released from the hospital, there were tears and cheers, and so much joy I thought my heart would burst. Sarah had beaten leukemia. She was going to live. But the story wasn't over. During Sarah's recovery, while the world was focused on her miraculous survival, I'd been doing some digging. Something about the whole situation had been nagging at me, and I finally figured out what it was. The trust fund that had been set up for Sarah as part of the adoption agreement, it was worth $250,000, accessible when she turned 30. But that seemed like a small amount for a family as wealthy as the Harringtons. They spent more than that on a vacation home. So I asked Marcus to look into it, to really examine the adoption agreement. What he found was shocking. The trust fund wasn't worth $250,000. It was worth $25 million. $25 million. The $250,000 was just the amount Sarah was supposed to get in the first distribution. She was supposed to receive additional distributions at 35, 40, and 45, with the remainder coming to her at 50. But Mom and Dad had never told Sarah about the full amount. They'd only ever mentioned the $250,000. When I confronted them, they broke down. Yes, they'd known about the full amount. And yes, they'd been planning to keep most of it for themselves. The adoption agreement had some ambiguity in the language. It said the money was to be used for Sarah's benefit and care, but didn't specify that it all had to go directly to Sarah. Mom and Dad had been interpreting that to mean they could use it however they saw fit, as long as Sarah was taken care of. They'd been taking distributions from the trust for years, supposedly for Sarah's expenses, but actually using it for their own purposes. The nice house they'd bought for more room for the family, paid for with Sarah's trust fund. The renovations to the kitchen, Sarah's money. Dad's new car, Sarah's money. Over the years, they'd gone through almost $5 million of Sarah's inheritance. I was furious, Marcus was furious, and when we told Sarah, still recovering from her transplant, she was devastated all over again. "Everyone's been using me," she said dully. "James wanted to use me for my money and my life insurance. The Harringtons wanted to use me to preserve their reputation, and Mom and Dad have been stealing from me for years." "I'm not using you," I said. "Marcus isn't using you. We love you." "I know," she said. "You two are the only ones I trust anymore." Sarah sued Mom and Dad for the misappropriation of her trust fund. It was ugly and painful, and it tore our family apart. Mom and Dad tried to justify what they'd done, saying they'd raised Sarah and deserved compensation, that they'd only taken what they were owed for her care. But the courts didn't see it that way. Sarah won the lawsuit. Mom and Dad were ordered to pay back the $5 million they'd taken plus interest. They had to sell their house to do it. They declared bankruptcy. I haven't spoken to them since the trial, neither has Sarah. Marcus still takes their calls sometimes, but it's strained. As for the Harringtons, once Sarah recovered, they tried to rebuild their image. They made a big show of donating to leukemia research, of supporting cancer patients. Elizabeth even gave a few interviews about the importance of bone marrow donation. She never once mentioned Sarah by name. Sarah could have kept pushing, kept telling her story, kept the pressure on the Harringtons, but she was tired of fighting. She'd won the important battle, she was alive. She decided to let the rest go. The lawsuit against mom and dad, combined with the publicity from her blog, had left Sarah with more than just her trust fund money. Her story had inspired people. Her graphic design business exploded with new clients who wanted to support her. She was offered a book deal, which she accepted. She became a speaker, talking to cancer patients and survivors about fighting for yourself and not accepting less than you deserve. James, by the way, tried to come crawling back when he heard about the trust fund. Sarah had him arrested for violating the restraining order. Last I heard, he was living in another state, working at a chain gym. The blonde woman left him when she realized he wasn't going to get any money after all. It's been 3 years now since Sarah's diagnosis. 3 years since our family imploded and reformed into something new and strange. Sarah is still in remission, healthy and strong. She never did get married. She says she's happy on her own for now, learning to trust again. Marcus and I are closer than ever. We have dinner with Sarah every Sunday, a tradition we started when she got out of the hospital. It's our new family, the three of us, and Sarah's best friend Rachel, and Marcus's wife Jennifer, and my girlfriend Amy, who I started dating about a year ago. Sometimes I think about everything that happened and it feels surreal. The betrayals, the secrets, the public battle, all of it. Sometimes I'm angry all over again at Mom and Dad, at the Harringtons, at James. But mostly I'm just grateful. Grateful that Sarah is alive. Grateful that we found out the truth, even though it hurt. Grateful that Sarah had the courage to fight, not just for her life, but for her right to the truth and to justice. Last week, Sarah got some interesting news. Elizabeth Harrington's husband, the senator, had been caught in a scandal, embezzling campaign funds. His political career was over, and Elizabeth, trying to distance herself from her husband's crimes, had filed for divorce. The news mentioned that Elizabeth would likely lose most of her wealth in the divorce, since the money had come from her family, not her husband's, and there was an ironclad prenup. Sarah just shrugged when she heard. "Karma's a bitch," she said simply. But then, a few days ago, something unexpected happened. Sarah got a letter. It was from Elizabeth Harrington. Sarah brought it to our Sunday dinner, unopened. "Should I read it?" she asked us. "That's up to you," Marcus said carefully, "but maybe not alone. Whatever it says, you should have support." Sarah nodded. She opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a single sheet of expensive stationery. She read it silently, her face unreadable. "Well," I finally asked. Sarah looked up, tears in her eyes. "She apologized," she said, her voice wondering. "Elizabeth apologized. She says giving me up was the hardest thing she ever did, but that she was 17 and her parents didn't give her a choice. She says she's thought about me every day for 27 years. She says she was terrified when I contacted her, terrified of her husband finding out, of her children finding out, of losing everything. She says she knows that's not an excuse for how she handled it. She says she knows it's too late and that I probably hate her, but that she wants me to know she's sorry. And she's proud of me, of how I fought, of the person I've become." Sarah wiped her eyes. She says if I ever want to meet her, she'd like that, but she understands if I don't. She's not asking for forgiveness, just offering the truth. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked quietly. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to throw this letter away and never think about her again. She doesn't deserve my forgiveness." "No," I agreed, "she doesn't. But part of me wants to meet her," Sarah continued, "wants to hear her story, wants to understand." She looked at me. "Is that crazy?" "No," I said, "it's human." Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. "I need time to think about it." "Take all the time you need," Marcus said. "Whatever you decide, we support you." That was last week. Sarah still hasn't decided what to do about Elizabeth's letter. Maybe she'll meet with her, maybe she won't. Maybe they'll form some kind of relationship, or maybe this is the end of their story. But that's Sarah's choice to make, and whatever she decides, I'll stand by her. We all will. Because that's what family does, real family, not the people who share your blood or who raised you necessarily, but the people who show up for you, who fight for you, who stand by you when everything falls apart. Sarah has that now, she has us. And 3 years after a routine checkup revealed leukemia, and set off a chain of events that destroyed our family and rebuilt it into something new, Sarah is alive, healthy, and surrounded by people who genuinely love her. In the end, that's all that really matters. Though I have to admit, I'm curious what Sarah will decide about Elizabeth, and there's a part of me that wonders if there are more secrets waiting to be uncovered, more shoes waiting to drop. The Harrington family has a lot of skeletons in their closets, if the senator's embezzlement scandal is any indication. But those are worries for another day. Today, we're just celebrating life, love, and the family we've chosen. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The truth is, though, things didn't stay quiet for long. They never do, not when the Harrington family is involved. About 2 months after Sarah received Elizabeth's letter, she made her decision. She agreed to meet with Elizabeth, but only in a neutral location and with me present. Elizabeth agreed immediately. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the usual haunts of the wealthy elite. Elizabeth arrived alone, without her security team or her lawyer. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her, older, more tired, but also somehow more real. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She and Sarah stared at each other for a long moment when they first came face to face. The resemblance was striking now that I was looking for it. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Elizabeth said quietly. Sarah didn't respond, just sat down at the table. Elizabeth sat across from her. I positioned myself slightly behind Sarah, a silent show of support and protection. "I meant what I said in my letter," Elizabeth began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I handled everything in the worst possible way, but I want you to know the truth, all of it." And she told us everything. Elizabeth had been 17 when she got pregnant, a senior in high school. The father was a boy from school, someone from a middle-class family. When Elizabeth's parents found out, they were horrified. The Harrington name couldn't be associated with such a scandal. They gave Elizabeth 2 choices: have an abortion or have the baby in secret and give it up for adoption. Elizabeth had wanted to keep the baby. She'd begged her parents, offered to drop out of school, to do whatever it took. But her parents were immovable. If she kept the baby, they would disown her, cut her off completely. She would have no money, no support, no way to care for a child. So she agreed to the adoption. She was sent away to stay with distant relatives in another state for the last months of her pregnancy. She gave birth alone, held Sarah for 15 minutes before the nurses took her away, and then went home and pretended it had never happened. "I went to college like nothing had changed," Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. "I got married at 22 to a man my parents approved of. I had 3 children. I built a life. But there wasn't a single day when I didn't think about you, wonder about you, hope you were happy." "Then why didn't you help when I first reached out?" Sarah asked, her voice hard. "If you cared so much, why did you ignore my message?" Elizabeth closed her eyes. "Because I was terrified. My husband didn't know about you. My children didn't know. And I knew if the truth came out, I would lose everything. My marriage, my family, my position in society. Everything my parents had forced me to protect by giving you up in the first place." She opened her eyes, looking directly at Sarah. "I was a coward. I chose protecting my comfortable life over saving yours, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." "You only agreed to help when you had no other choice," Sarah said, "when the public pressure made it impossible to refuse." "Yes," Elizabeth admitted. "You're right. If you hadn't gone public, if you hadn't forced my hand, I probably would have continued to hide, and you would have died." Tears were streaming down her face now. "You would have died, and I would have had to live with that, and I would have deserved it." Sarah was quiet for a long time. I could see her struggling with her emotions, trying to decide how to feel. "Tell me about him," she finally said. "My biological father, who was he?" Elizabeth's face shifted, became somehow both sad and fond. "His name was David Chen. He was smart, funny, kind. We were in AP chemistry together. We dated for about 4 months before I got pregnant." She paused. "He wanted to keep you too. He offered to get a job to help support you. But my parents threatened his family, said they'd destroy his father's business if David didn't stay away from me and from you. So he did." "Where is he now?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Elizabeth said. "After graduation, he went to college somewhere out of state. I never saw him again. I looked him up once about 10 years ago. He's a chemistry professor at a university in California. He's married, has 2 kids." "Does he know about me?" "I don't think so. My parents made sure everything was kept quiet. As far as I know, David thinks I had an abortion like my parents wanted." Sarah absorbed this. "I want his contact information." "Of course," Elizabeth said immediately. "I'll send you everything I have." They talked for another hour. Elizabeth told Sarah about her pregnancy, about the adoption, about the years since. Sarah asked questions, some angry, some just curious. I mostly stayed quiet, watching, ready to intervene if Sarah needed me to. Finally, Sarah stood up. "I don't forgive you," she said bluntly. "I don't know if I ever will. You gave me up, you took money to keep me secret, and you almost let me die to protect your reputation. Those aren't things that can be easily forgiven." Elizabeth nodded, accepting this. "I understand." But Sarah continued. I believe that you were young and scared and pressured by your parents. I believe that you thought about me over the years, and I believe that you're genuinely sorry now, even if it's too late to matter much." "It is too late," Elizabeth agreed quietly, "but for what it's worth, I am sorry, more sorry than I can ever express." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not interested in having a mother-daughter relationship with you. That ship has sailed. But if you want to get to know me as a person, if you want to maybe be acquaintances who share DNA, I'm willing to try that." Hope flashed across Elizabeth's face. "I would like that, very much." "Okay then," Sarah said. She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The trust fund my biological grandparents set up. I want it transferred entirely into my name, with no access for anyone else. And I want a full accounting of every penny that's been taken from it over the years." "Done," Elizabeth said immediately. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers." We left the cafe. In the car, Sarah was quiet. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Confused, angry, sad, relieved maybe. It's complicated." "You don't have to have all the answers right now," I said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I want to contact David, my biological father." "Are you sure?" "No," she said honestly, "but I want to know where I come from. All of it. Is that weird?" "Not at all," I assured her. Sarah did contact David Chen. She found him on the university website where he taught and sent him an email explaining who she was. His response came within hours. He'd had no idea. Elizabeth's parents had told him she'd had an abortion. He'd thought about that baby for 28 years, had grieved for the child he'd never gotten to meet. Finding out that Sarah was alive, that she'd been adopted, that she'd survived cancer, he was overwhelmed. David flew out to meet Sarah 2 weeks later. Unlike the tense meeting with Elizabeth, this one was emotional in a different way. David brought photo albums showing his family, talked about his life, asked 1,000 questions about Sarah's. He cried when he heard about the leukemia, about how close he'd come to losing a daughter he'd never known he had. "I would have been tested," he said fiercely. "If I'd known, I would have been tested immediately. I wouldn't have cared about the scandal or the consequences." "I know," Sarah said, and I could tell she believed him. David's wife was understanding and supportive. His kids, Sarah's half-siblings, were excited to meet her. Within a few months, Sarah had built a real relationship with David and his family. They video called weekly, visited when they could, and genuinely seemed to care about each other. It was healing for Sarah in a way I hadn't expected. She had blood family now who chose her, who wanted her in their lives not out of obligation or public pressure, but because they genuinely cared. Things with Elizabeth remained cordial but distant. They had coffee every few months, exchanged emails occasionally. Elizabeth's divorce went through, and her 3 children found out about Sarah. The 2 daughters were interested in meeting their half-sister. The son wanted nothing to do with her. Sarah understood and didn't push. As for Mom and Dad, they tried to reach out a few times after the lawsuit, trying to rebuild bridges. Sarah was willing to have a conversation, but on her terms. She met with them, with Marcus and me present, and laid out her conditions. "I need you to acknowledge what you did," she said. "Not justify it, not explain it away. Just acknowledge that you stole from me and that it was wrong." Mom tried to protest that they'd raised her, that they deserved compensation, but Dad put a hand on her arm to stop her. "You're right," Dad said heavily. "We stole from you. We justified it to ourselves for years, but that's what it was, theft, and it was wrong." Mom started crying. "We did love you," she said. "We do love you. Everything wasn't a lie." "I know you loved me," Sarah said. "I believe that, but you also used me, and I need you to understand that your love doesn't cancel out the harm you caused." It was a start. Sarah agreed to occasional family dinners, supervised visits, slowly rebuilding something with Mom and Dad. It would never be what it was before, that trust was gone, but it was something. The biggest surprise came about 6 months after Sarah's meeting with Elizabeth. The Harrington family patriarch, Elizabeth's father, died suddenly of a heart attack. At the reading of his will, there was a shock. He'd left a significant portion of his estate, nearly $50 million, to Sarah. The will included a letter, written shortly before his death. In it, he apologized for forcing Elizabeth to give up Sarah, for paying to keep her secret, for valuing the family reputation over the life of his granddaughter. He said he'd been following Sarah's story, had seen her bravery in going public, her strength in fighting for her life. He said he was proud of her and ashamed of himself. The money came with no strings attached. Sarah could do whatever she wanted with it. Elizabeth's other children contested the will, of course. They argued that Sarah had manipulated their grandfather, that she'd used her cancer to guilt him into changing his will. But the will was ironclad, and their challenges went nowhere. Sarah donated $10 million to leukemia research and bone marrow donation advocacy. She used another $5 million to pay back everyone who had crowdfunded to help with her medical expenses when her story first went public. She set up a foundation to help other people facing medical crises and family betrayals get legal help. The rest she kept, investing it carefully. She was set for life. "It's strange," she told me one night over dinner. "A year ago, I was dying and everyone around me was either stealing from me or betraying me. Now I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, and I'm surrounded by people who genuinely care. It's almost hard to believe it's real." "You fought for it," I said. "You could have stayed quiet, could have protected everyone's secrets, could have just accepted what was happening to you, but you didn't. You fought back." "I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said. "You're the one who found out about Elizabeth. You're the one who protected me from James. You've been there every step of the way." "That's what big brothers are for," I said. She smiled. 13 months older does not make you my big brother. "This still counts." We laughed and it felt good. Normal. After 3 years of drama and betrayal and life-or-death stakes, normal felt pretty damn good. But of course, there was one more shoe to drop. There always is with stories like this. It came in the form of James, Sarah's ex-fiance, showing up at her apartment one night. Sarah called me immediately, terrified. He'd violated the restraining order before and been arrested. This was the second violation. I called the police and then drove to Sarah's apartment as fast as I could. When I got there, the police were already there, James in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car, but Sarah was shaken. "He was screaming at me through the door," she said, saying I owed him, that if it wasn't for him, I would never have fought so hard to live, that I should give him money as compensation for emotional distress. "He's insane," I said. "He's desperate," Sarah corrected. "I looked him up last week, just curiosity. He's broke, Tommy. Lost his job, can't find another one because employers Google him and find all the news stories about what he did to me. He's living in his car." "Good," I said harshly. "He deserves worse." "I know," Sarah said, "but it's still sad in a way. He destroyed his own life out of greed." James was arrested and eventually sentenced to 6 months in jail for violating the restraining order multiple times. The blonde woman he'd been cheating with came forward during the trial, testifying that James had actually started dating her 6 months before Sarah's diagnosis, that he'd been planning to leave Sarah, but decided to stay when he found out about the inheritance. It was a final, ugly revelation, but also in a way a relief. It confirmed that Sarah cutting James out of her life had been absolutely the right choice. After the trial, things finally settled down. Sarah's life found a rhythm. She ran her business, which had expanded significantly thanks to all the publicity. She worked with her foundation, helping other people navigate medical and legal crises. She maintained her relationship with David and his family, her careful acquaintanceship with Elizabeth, her slowly rebuilding connection with Mom and Dad. And she lived. She traveled, tried new things, made new friends, even started dating again, carefully and slowly. One night, about 4 years after her initial diagnosis, Sarah called me, Marcus, Rachel, Jennifer, and Amy to her apartment for dinner. When we arrived, she had champagne waiting. "What are we celebrating?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, that bright, fierce smile that I'd been afraid I'd never see again when she was at her sickest. 4 years cancer-free. The doctors say if I make it to 5 years, I'm essentially cured. The chances of relapse drop to almost nothing. We cheered and popped the champagne. As we toasted to Sarah's health, to her strength, to her future, I looked around at the people gathered there. This was family. Not the family any of us had been born into or expected, but the family we'd become through fire and betrayal and fighting for what mattered. "To Sarah," I said, raising my glass, "the strongest person I know." "To Sarah," everyone echoed. And Sarah, my sister in every way that mattered, smiled and was happy. That was a year ago. Last month, Sarah passed the 5-year mark. She's officially considered cured. She celebrated by skydiving, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the courage for before cancer. Compared to chemo, she said, jumping out of a plane is nothing. She's engaged now to a man named Alex who she met through her foundation. He's a lawyer who specializes in medical ethics. He knows everything about her past, everything she's been through, and he loves her not despite it, but because of who it made her become. The wedding is in 3 months. Elizabeth is invited, as are Mom and Dad, though they'll be seated separately. David is walking Sarah down the aisle, something that makes both of them tear up when they talk about it. James sent a letter from whatever halfway house he's living in now, asking to be invited to the wedding. Sarah threw it away without responding. As for me, I'm going to be the best man, or as Sarah calls it, the best big brother, even though I'm still insisting 13 months doesn't count. Life is good, Sarah is healthy, our family, chosen and otherwise, is healing, and the secrets that once threatened to destroy us have instead freed us to build something better, something real. Sometimes I think about that day in the hospital, when we first found out Sarah had leukemia, how scared we all were, how we had no idea that the cancer would be just the beginning, that it would unravel secrets and betrayals we never suspected. But I also think about how Sarah fought, how she refused to be a victim, refused to stay silent, refused to protect people who didn't deserve protection. She took control of her story and in doing so, saved her own life and rebuilt it into something better than it was before. That's the real story, not the cancer, not the betrayals, not the revenge. The real story is about a woman who refused to give up, who fought for herself when no one else would, and who came out the other side stronger. And I'm honored to be her brother, 13 months older or not.